Welcome back. Today we are going to be looking at working from home as a self-employed individual. This is something that almost every self-employed business owner will do to some extent. For some it's going to be a few hours here, a few hours there. For others though, the full working week could be spent in a home office. Either way, there could be some additional expenditure that needs to be adjusted for, which would reduce taxable profits and then lower your tax bill. So today we're going to be covering which expenses you might be able to include in this calculation. We'll cover the different ways of calculating these expenses, and then I'm going to show you a worked example of how I calculate my use of home. Before we do get into this today, don't forget to like the video for me and subscribe to the channel, where you'll find lots of helpful content, especially for those of you who are self-employed. Now, if you are self-employed and you are working from home, what you're going to notice is that certain bills will start to creep up. You'll be using more electricity, you'll be using more water, you might be heating your home for much more of the day, and where that is the case, it does make sense that you're able to allocate some of those costs across to your self-employment. And to be honest, even where a bill hasn't necessarily increased as a result of your working from home, take rent as an example, which is likely to be the same amount irrelevant of where you actually work from, it's still actually possible to allocate some of those costs to your self-employment, which should be considered a huge win. These are often expenses that you would have been incurring anyway, but now you're going to be getting some tax relief on them, so this opportunity really shouldn't be missed. So let's start by running through the type of expenses you might be able to claim in your working from home calculation. These include heating, electricity, council tax, home insurance, home repairs, mortgage interest or rent, and internet and telephone use. So we've got a pretty broad array of expenses that could be included, and it's likely that these expenses make up a good chunk of your personal monthly outgoings, which means the impact on your self-assessment tax bill could be pretty significant if these are accounted for correctly. So now we know what expenses can be included, but unfortunately we're not able to claim 100% of these bills as allowable deductions. It's only the business element that we want to include. So now we need to look at how to calculate your business share of those expenses. To do this, you are given a couple of options. HMRC will often offer you a simplified way of doing things as well as a more long-winded way, and that's exactly what they've done here. The simplified method allows you to claim a fixed monthly rate based on the number of hours you work from home each month. The lowest rate being £10 per month and the highest rate being £26 per month, depending on which range you fall into. It's important to point out that you must work from home a minimum of 25 hours per month in order to use this simplified method. This was a rule that was relaxed during COVID, when HMRC allowed anyone to claim the full allowance even if they only worked 1 hour from home. That minimum has now been reinstated for the 22-23 tax year, so make sure that you bear that in mind. The flat rate allowance also doesn't account for telephone and broadband expenses, which you may be able to include a proportion of on top of the fixed rate. Now, the great thing about this is that you can probably do this calculation in your head or on a scrap bit of paper in 30 seconds or so. The bad thing is that in exchange for its simplicity and given current energy prices, you're usually going to understate your actual expenses incurred. Which then brings us on to the second option, which is to calculate the actual business use of your home. Typically that's going to be expressed as a percentage. You then take that percentage and you apply it to all the bills that were mentioned earlier in the video. So if your figure is 10%, you can claim 10% of your rent, 10% of your electricity, 10% of council tax, and so on and so on. The question is though, how do you actually calculate that percentage in a way that HMRC are going to be happy with? Well, HMRC's guidance on this is actually pretty open-ended, meaning that they don't give you an exact method that you must use to calculate the split between business and personal. Instead, they just say that you'll need to find a reasonable method of dividing your cost. For example, the number of rooms you use for business or the amount of time you spend working from home. They then go on to give an example of someone who has 4 rooms in their home using 1 for business use. Their total electricity bill is £400, so the allowable expense is £100. What's important though is that they then go on to adjust this figure for the fact that they only actually work from home 1 day per week and therefore claim 1/7 of that £100. The reason that that is so important is that they are suggesting that there is split use for that room, some for your business and some for personal. If there isn't a split use, if you were to use a room of your house for business purposes 100% of the time and you claim that for 7 days a week every week, then it can create a capital gains tax issue when you come to sell your home. Essentially, you could unintentionally wave goodbye to your main residence capital gains exemption, which is known as principal private residence relief, on that 1 room of your home. So it would usually be a safer bet to take a conservative approach and ensure a split use between business and personal. And that is exactly what this online calculator from Go Simple Tax is going to help you to do. I'm going to link to this one down below. You can all go and access this one completely for free. This will take into account the number of rooms being used and the amount of time each room is occupied by the self-employment. So let's use it to run through a quick example. Now, I will just point out here that even though a tax year is mentioned, the calculation that you actually use, the way it's calculated, is going to be the same each year anyway. That doesn't change. It's only your numbers that are going to change. So you'll need to go away and total up how much heating cost you in the tax year, how much your home insurance cost you, etc, etc. The thing that will change, or can change though, are the simplified rates. We mentioned these earlier in the video, so you can see on the right hand side here, £10, £18 and £26 depending on how many hours per month you work from home. You can also see they've input here a minimum of 25 hours. Remember, you can only use the simplified method if you work more than 25 hours per month from home, but it's really handy to have this here on the right hand side so you can compare the results of the simplified method against the actual calculation across here. It's also useful below to see this as tax relief. So depending on what rate of tax you pay, if you pay basic rate tax, your tax relief will be, or tax relief and national insurance relief will be at a rate of 29%. If you're a higher rate taxpayer, 42%, and if you're an additional rate taxpayer, 47%. So by looking at these, you'll be able to compare, once we've input the numbers, how much tax relief you'll be saving under each method. And the difference can be pretty significant, so it's important that you choose the right option. So let's start and let's input some numbers here. So for heating, we'll say £1,200 of heating bills. Electricity, let's go with half of that. Mortgage interest of, let's say, 6,000, although that's going to vary pretty significantly. What I really like here is that you're given a little bit of additional guidance. So here it tells you that you cannot claim for the capital repayment part of your annual mortgage repayment costs, only the mortgage interest. So you need to make sure you're excluding the capital element there. Home insurance, another bit of guidance here. If you're planning to start working from home or running a business from home, you need to check that that is allowable under your insurance. These are little things that you may not actually think of, but you might need to go and do. So we'll put 250 in here. Repairs, so a little bit of guidance on repairs repairs here, saying that an extension or loft conversion would not be able to claim. Essentially, you're going to be allowed repairs and renewals, which can be a little bit complicated. You need to be replacing like for like. If you do an extension, or even if you replace a kitchen with a much bigger kitchen, much more expensive, much flashier kitchen, that wouldn't necessarily fall under repairs and renewals. It might be considered improvements to your home and therefore not allowable. So sometimes repairs and renewals will require a little bit of additional assistance, but certainly if you've given your house a lick of paint and you spent 200 quid on materials, then potentially we can include that and it will be adjusted for in the calculation. Cleaning bills, you'll clean your home, and part of that, those cleaning costs will be associated to that one or potentially more rooms of your house that you use for business purposes. So again, you'll want to input a figure here. Rent, typically you're either going to be inputting rent or mortgage interest. I guess there possibly are situations where you may have both. And again, a bit of additional guidance: if you start working from home or operating a self-employment from home, then it's worth checking the terms of your agreement or speaking to your landlord to make sure that's actually allowable. I'm going to leave that one blank as I've already got my mortgage interest up here. Council tax will be another big one that can vary pretty significantly, but it's going to have a big impact on the overall numbers. And then you want to total up the number of rooms in your house. So in this example, I'm going to say there are 5 rooms in my house. It's kind of assuming that they are all of equal size, and I'm going to say that I use 1 room for business purposes. You could put 2 rooms, in which case the calculator will add an additional section here below, but for me I use 1 room as an office from home. You can then see below that you'll need to enter how many hours on average, each is an average, so you don't have to be absolutely exact, but on average each month that you use that room. So if I say I use this room that I'm working in around 300 hours per month, but I'm then going to adjust for the number of hours that I'm using it for business purposes. So if I say I use it around 250 hours for business and then about 50 hours a month for personal use, remember what you're doing there. You're saying that there is, of this 1 room that I use for business, it is a split use room. Okay, that should stop people from having any issues with losing their capital gains exemption, principal private residence relief, because you're saying that it's multiple use for this room. Okay, and you can see here it's then calculated my allowable cost at 1,817. And again, what I love is that you can compare that figure, my 300 hours or 250 hours of working from home would put me in this category, 101 plus hours of the simplified method. This is the monthly rate. So under the simplified method, I could claim 12 lots of £26, which will be just over £300, £312 there. Under the actual method, by calculating the actual split, I'm able to claim £1,817. And you can see as well how much that relates to in terms of tax relief. So it can be a huge difference between the two. If you're a basic rate taxpayer, the simplified method would get me £90 of tax relief, but the actual calculation would get me £526. So it's really important to take the time to total up your annual bills, pop them into the calculator and calculate your actual split before you make a decision on which method you're actually going to use. Now, whichever approach you do decide to take, it's really important that you're able to justify your claim should you ever be asked. You don't actually need to provide a copy of your calculation to HMRC when you submit a tax return, but it could be questioned at a later date. This means keeping a copy of the calculation for 5 years following the submission deadline of the tax return in question. So although everyone's situation is different and the calculator that we looked at does come with a disclaimer at the bottom, I would certainly be taking a screenshot of that calculation for my records and then any other adjustments that you might make. I really hope that you found that useful. Make sure that you like, subscribe, and share the video with someone else who you think needs to know this, and I'll see you next time.